Most people will consider the beginning of the high-density, ultra-high-definition screens to be Apple's introduction of the so-called Retina displays with their iPhones in 2009, 10, I don't remember. The speed of the evolution of display technology has always been much slower than other tech areas. We were stuck with basically the same resolution for TV broadcast for decades, PAL and NTSC, and in display technology we spent a good long 2 decades to evolve from VGA to having 1080p as standard. In the meantime, the mainstream personal computer evolved from having a few thousand transistors and running at 4 MHz or 4.17 to multi-core, multi-gigahertz computers. But very people know that, even though widespread marketing didn't happen until the beginning of the second decade of the 21st century, high-density screens 200 plus dpi already existed, at least as prototypes in the late 90s. The first prototype, called Monet, from 1996, achieved 175 points per inch. The challenge to manufacture and drive such high screen resolution were well recognized back then. Monet had 1.6 miles of copper wires as a way to tackle resistance and increase yield. However, manufacturability remained a challenge. So, in 1998, IBM built a new prototype. It was called Röntgen. I'm not sure I'm spelling this right. Röntgen had a display area of 16.3 inches and a resolution of 2560 by 2048. That's higher than the resolution of the 30-inch screens of the first half of the first decade of the 21st century. Those had 2560 by 1600 pixels. To keep costs down, IBM used multiple graphics cards to drive a single display. A very simple task at the time if you consider that each quarter of the display had 1280 by 1024 pixels, a very common resolution in the late 90s, even for small domestic CRT displays. IBM's estimate for production failed though. In theory, the first ThinkPads to ship with high-density displays would have been released at any time between 1999 and 2000. At the time, IBM experimented displays with higher and higher densities and measured the improvements in user experience and font rendering. They found benefits beyond 200 dpi, but concluded that achieving higher densities is not cost-effective. As a matter of fact, high-density desktop displays still hover around 200 dpi, with higher densities being found only in mobile phones. In 2001 or 2, IBM released the first commercially available high-density desktop screen, the IBM T220. It had the absurd price tag of $20,000 and had to be driven by the graphics card in a very specific way. In 2002, IBM released the T221. The T221 remains, in my opinion, the best display ever made. It's not anymore the king of image quality, but the way it can handle synchronize any kind of input and the quality of its scaler makes it a very desirable display for any computer enthusiast looking for a screen that can do anything and make it look proper. Driving so many pixels in a fast and effective way remains a challenge to this day. 4K motion video requires a modern computer with a very fast processor. Fine 3D rendering demands a computer with a very powerful GPU. To reach the required performance and demonstrate the capabilities of its screen in the early 2000s, IBM Research launched the Deep View project. Deep View was supposed to be the affordable way to do distributed rendering by running 8 Linux nodes and 2 gigabit Ethernet network switches. Each node was powered by two 866 MHz processors with 1 GB of RAM and pushed the pixels to the SGE. The SGE, or Scalable Graphics Engine, was a very interesting concept. It was a network-attached frame buffer. It routed income pixels from the multiple sources and sent the final composed image to the T221 using DVI. It could handle up to 16 inputs and drive 8 synchronized DVI outputs. However, the T221 only required 4. IBM demonstrated the usefulness of the SGE solution and the T221 by showcasing a few applications. The first one was CAD, Computer-Aided Design, with CATIA. The benefits for CATIA are clear. You can see more detail without having to zoom in and avoid lost or clouded segments that wouldn't be discernible on a standard density screen. Medical imaging was another clear use case for the technology. IBM demonstrated pushing over 1822.8 megabyte images through the nodes of deep field to the IBM T221, allowing doctors to see in motion details that would only be visible in static images. The surprise here was entertainment and gaming. IBM foresaw gaming as a market for high-density screens and showcased Quake 3 Arena on the T221. Unfortunately, I could never find the original video nor the full resolution image of the demo. IBM also demonstrated a flight simulator, and I wonder which one that was. The IBM T221 is probably the most deeply reviewed monitor or piece of computer hardware ever. It has been evaluated and certified to reproduce accurately oil paintings, with results exceeding the ones achieved by librarians and museums of the time. It had its color reproduction quality measured for many different parameters such as skin, sky, and plane colors. It has also had the most detailed review I've ever seen for any display, covering color coverage and white balance against CIE for each corner of the display, panel reflectance, the straightness of the lines, jitter and drift, warm-up period, the most detailed viewing angle test I've ever seen, extra detailed color gamut tests, and so on. Later on, IBM started ID Tech with other manufacturers releasing the rebadged versions of the T221, Ion 1, the ViewSonic VP2290B. The engineering specifications are also online and reveal how ingenious and fascinating it was to drive such high number of pixels at the time. I'm going to cover that and more in my following video, an in-depth review of one or two of my T221s. Many thanks to Stephen Wright for the wonderful display.